when 3 men from Tate Construction cornered a silent, battle-scarred Belgian Malinois tethered outside the Ridgeview farm and feed on the edge of Merritt, British Columbia. They were completely certain they were looking at an abandoned dog. A local veterinarian told them clearly to step back. They laughed. Then the youngest Tate reached for the tactical harness, and the quiet man who walked out from behind the propane cage made certain none of them would laugh like that again. The October wind cutting across the Thompson Plateau did not blow soft. It came off the benchlands above the Nicola River, carrying the smell of sage, pine bark, and the first real cold of the season. The kind of cold that settles into gravel parking lots and doesn't leave until spring. Outside the Ridgeview farm and feed, a cluster of battered pickup trucks and a single commercial flatbed sat on packed gravel, their fenders dusted orange with road chalk from the Coquihalla. The flatbed bore the bright yellow logo of Tate Construction and Land Development, its side panels still warm from a long highway run south. Tegan Hurst pulled her faded green Dodge Ram into the far end of the lot, cut the engine, and sat for a moment with her hands still on the wheel. She was 29 years old, lean and deliberate in the way people become when they've spent years doing physical work in unforgiving conditions. 3 of those years as a veterinary officer attached to a Canadian Forces logistics unit in Kandahar, the years since doing large animal emergency calls across a 300-kilometer stretch of the BC interior. She knew how to read a room. She knew, more importantly, how to read a dog, which was why she did not get out of her truck right away. Tied to the rear tow hitch of a dark grey Jeep Cherokee parked near the propane cage was the most composed animal she had seen in years. A Belgian Malinois, lean as a greyhound, dense as a coiled cable, with a fawn and black coat interrupted along his left shoulder by a pale raised scar she recognized at once as the kind left by shrapnel. He sat absolutely still in the gravel. Not the stillness of a dog who was calm, the stillness of a dog who was counting. His eyes moved across the 3 men standing in a loose arc around him in slow, precise rotations. Right, center, left, center, right. The way high-drive working dogs assess multiple targets when they are not yet certain which one will move first. Across his chest and back, the dog wore a faded coyote tan tactical harness. The Velcro patch panels had stripped clean, leaving only the rectangular shadows of adhesive residue where a unit designation had once been fixed. Inside his left ear, visible when his head turned, was a purple tattoo, K71138. That was not a ranch dog, that was not a stray. Tegan got out of her truck. The 3 men were not strangers to the Nicola Valley. Norman Tate had been the most recognizable face in the regional development corridor for the better part of 2 decades. A heavy-set man in his late 50s with close-cropped silver hair, a North Face vest that cost more than most people's grocery budgets, and a manner that made every conversation feel like a negotiation he had already won. His company had put up commercial warehouses, logging access roads, and a controversial resort on leased Crown land north of Kamloops. He was not a man accustomed to being told no. Beside him stood his son, Colton Tate, 26, broad across the chest, wearing a pearl-snap shirt and work boots that had never seen actual work. Colton had his father's jaw and none of his father's patience. He was crouched slightly, one gloved hand extended toward the dog, testing its reaction the way a person tests a fence line they plan to step over. The 3rd man was Blake Shearing, Tate Construction's site foreman, thick-necked, unhurried, and accustomed to making problems disappear before Norman had to acknowledge them directly. "He's not even growling," Colton said, glancing back over his shoulder. "Somebody tied him off and went in for coffee. Look at the condition he's in. Scar on the shoulder, ribs showing under that vest. Probably dumped." Norman Tate spat onto the gravel and studied the animal the way he studied land parcels. "Good muscle structure. Good bone. Chain him in the back of the flatbed, Blake. A dog like that will keep the night crew at the Kamloops site honest. Get the tow rope from behind the seat." Tegan was 20 meters out and moving when she called across the wind, "Don't touch that dog." Norman Tate turned with the slow deliberation of a man who is genuinely surprised when people speak to him without being spoken to first. His expression moved through mild surprise, mild amusement, and mild contempt in roughly 2 seconds. "I'm sorry." "Step away from the harness, all 3 of you." Tegan stopped 8 meters from the circle and kept her hands open, her voice at the register she used when talking livestock owners away from decisions they couldn't take back. "That animal is a certified military working dog. He is not abandoned, and he is not a stray. The tattoo in his left ear is a Canadian Forces K9 registry number. You put a hand on that harness without his handler's authorization, and you are going to lose significant meat off that arm." Colton straightened up slowly, tilting his head with a grin that was mostly theater. He looked at Blake. "She thinks Lassie here is some kind of special operator." He spread his hands wide. "He's sitting on a gravel lot outside a feed store in Merritt." "She's the vet," Blake said flatly, reading the crest on Tegan's fleece. "Gets worked up about lost dogs." "I'm telling you as a licensed veterinary officer and a former Canadian Forces captain," Tegan said, her feet planted, "that this animal is in an active threat assessment state. He is not sitting still because he is calm. He is sitting still because he is doing his job. The moment you breach his operational space without a handler command, he will respond, and you will not see it coming." Norman Tate made a short sound that was not quite a laugh. He looked at Colton. "Get the rope." Colton took 2 heavy, deliberate steps forward and reached his gloved right hand down toward the grab handle on the tactical harness. "Colton, stop." Tegan was already pulling out her phone. "The Belgian Malinois, registered working dog K71138. Call sign Storm did not bark, did not growl, did not show a single visible warning to anyone who did not know precisely what they were watching. The moment Colton's fingers made contact with the harness, Storm launched. The nylon runner attached to the Jeep's hitch snapped rigid with a sound like a rifle shot. Storm had calculated the geometry of his tether to within centimeters. He pivoted in mid-air with the kinetic precision that years of specialized training build into a dog's body at the level of reflex, and his jaws closed on Colton's right forearm with a force that penetrated heavy denim, a thermal underlayer, and the skin beneath, targeting the radial nerve with the exactness of a surgical tool. He did not shake. He did not tear. He clamped and held, rotating so that Colton's own momentum carried him off his feet. Colton hit the gravel on his back with a sound that carried across the entire lot, and before the shock of the fall had registered, 60 kilograms of working dog had planted 2 solid paws on his sternum and was holding him flat against the earth. Storm's face was less than 30 centimeters from Colton Tate's. His upper lip had drawn back to expose canines that gleamed in the flat October light. The sound coming from his chest was not a growl in any household pet sense of the word. It was a subsonic vibration that Colton felt through his ribcage before he heard it with his ears. "Get him off me!" Colton's voice cracked on the second word. Every trace of the theatrical confidence had gone. He was screaming in a register that bore no resemblance to the man who had been making jokes 45 seconds earlier, his face white and wet, his free hand scrabbling uselessly at the gravel. "He's crushing my arm. Someone get him off." "Blake!" Norman roared. His face had gone the deep, dangerous red of a man whose blood pressure is doing something structural. He did not reach for the dog's leash. His hand dropped to his right hip, where a leather holster was clipped to his belt, a .357 revolver, the kind of sidearm that wealthy rural landowners sometimes carry on long sight inspections at remote properties. He brought it up in a 2-hand grip and trained the barrel on Storm's skull. "I will put this animal down right now," Norman said. His voice was shaking with rage, not fear. "You back your dog off, or I will." "Norman, don't," Tegan said, stepping forward, though the distance was already wrong. "If you fire, you'll hit your own son." Blake Shearing had produced a heavy-handled fixed blade from his boot and was edging wide to the left, working towards Storm's flank. The lot had become a closed system approaching catastrophic pressure. Inside the farm supply building, customers had pressed against the far wall. A teenage stock clerk had dialed 911 and was standing rigid with the phone against his ear and no idea what to say next. Then a voice came from behind the propane cage. It was not loud, it was not raised. It was a low, unhurried baritone, the kind of voice that does not need volume to carry authority, and it arrived with a single German command that landed in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Storm aus. The transformation in the dog was instantaneous and complete. Storm released Colton's forearm, stepped back 2 precise paces, lowered into a rigid heel position, and locked his eyes onto the figure walking out from behind the propane storage unit. His breathing normalized in seconds. His lip dropped. The subsonic vibration stopped. He was, inside of 4 seconds, a completely different animal in the only way that mattered. He was back in his context. Colton scrambled sideways through the gravel on his elbows and heels, cradling his forearm against his chest, making sounds that had not yet organized themselves into words. Norman kept the revolver raised, both hands shaking, not from fear but from rage meeting adrenaline, in a man who had never had a situation run away from him this fast. The man walking toward them looked to be in his late 30s. He wore a canvas work jacket over dark wool, heavy lace-up boots, and a charcoal ball cap pulled low over his eyes. When he cleared the shadow of the brim, his eyes were the flat, measuring grey-green of the Thompson River in November, taking in depth, registering current, giving nothing back. He was not large the way Norman Tate was large. He was proportioned the way load-bearing structures are proportioned, broad across the shoulders. Nothing carried that didn't need to be there. On his right cheekbone, a faint white scar ran from the bone to the jaw. It mirrored almost exactly the old shrapnel scar on Storm's left shoulder. His name was Reese Caldwell. He had spent 11 years as a Tier 1 operator with Joint Task Force 2 before transitioning to a criminal intelligence and interdiction role with the Canada Border Services Agency. He did not walk like someone responding to an emergency. He walked like someone who had already decided how the next 5 minutes were going to proceed, and was simply arriving to confirm it. He did not look at Colton on the ground. He did not look at Blake's knife. He walked past Tegan close enough to give her one brief, precise nod of acknowledgement for the early warning she had provided, and stopped 5 meters from the barrel of Norman Tate's revolver. Storm pressed against Caldwell's left leg, head forward, breathing even. "Lower the firearm, Mr. Tate," Caldwell said quietly. "The hell I will." Norman's voice had gone thick. "Your dog mutilated my son on a public lot. I want your credentials, your handler number, and a supervisor's direct line right now. And then I want this animal declared dangerous and destroyed. I have a federal senator's direct number." "You have approximately 20 seconds to reholster that weapon," Caldwell said, "before this situation moves entirely outside the range of outcomes that are good for you." His tone contained no heat. It contained only the particular certainty of a man who has been in situations of genuine consequence and knows the difference between those and this. If you discharge a firearm at a credentialed handler and active service animal during a federal interdiction operation, what happens next will not be decided by either of us. Blake Shearing had stopped moving. The fixed blade looked smaller in his hand than it had 30 seconds ago. He looked at Norman with the expression of a man who is beginning to calculate whether there are exits he has not yet considered. "Norman," Tegan said, stepping up beside Caldwell. Her voice was steady in the way the voices of people become steady when they have been in emergencies and come out the other side enough times. "Look at the tattoo inside the dog's ear. Look at the credential on his belt." Norman's eyes moved. The revolver dropped 2 degrees. Not a surrender, but the involuntary movement of a man whose certainty is leaving him faster than he can replace it with bluster. Clipped to Caldwell's waistband, half concealed beneath the open canvas jacket, was a heavy brass credential plate bearing the Government of Canada crest and a CBSA field operations designation. Beside it, a compact radio unit, its earpiece wire running clean up the inside of his collar. Norman's jaw tightened. The gun did not come down. "I've operated in this province for 22 years. I build the roads that your agency drives on. You can't walk onto my property with a dog and a badge and expect—" "That Jeep does not belong to me," Caldwell said. A short silence. "The Grey Cherokee is registered to your company's Northern Logistics subsidiary, the same subsidiary that has been running construction material deliveries on Highway 97 for the past 7 months." Caldwell looked down at Storm once, then back at Norman with the patience of someone reading a report they have already memorized. Storm spent 4 rotations with the RCMP High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Unit before transitioning to federal service. He does not alert without cause. He does not bite without reason. He bit your son because your son attempted to remove him from an active alert position. Norman said nothing. The color in his face was no longer red. It was the specific gray of a man encountering information he had believed was contained. Storm was not sitting still in this lot because he was docile, Caldwell continued. He was sitting still because he was nose down on the rear cargo section of your flatbed. He has been in an unbroken alert on that vehicle since before you approached him. When your son grabbed for his harness, Storm defended his alert position. Caldwell paused. There are 42 kilograms of ephedrine hydrochloride, sealed in modified construction-grade conduit tubing in the second chassis section of that flatbed. Ephedrine, in those quantities, is a Schedule I controlled substance under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. It is also the primary precursor compound for methamphetamine synthesis and pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl production. The lot went completely quiet. The October wind moved a plastic bag slowly across the gravel and then stopped, as though it had decided this was not the moment. Tegan heard herself exhale. Norman Tate stood in the specific stillness of a man watching the last wall of something come down. He tried once more, because men like Norman Tate always try once more. Those pipe sections are standard construction material, ordered from a certified supplier in the lower mainland. Whatever your dog is reacting to, that doesn't constitute. 6 months, Caldwell said. That is how long CBSA Criminal Intelligence has had your logistics subsidiary, under a judicial intercept authorization obtained from the federal court. 3 manifests, 3 delivery routes, 3 scheduled consignments. The supplier in the lower mainland that you just mentioned is currently having its warehouse searched under a federal warrant issued out of the Vancouver office. Then Caldwell's right hand moved with a speed that did not belong on a man who had been standing so completely still. His palm closed around the cylinder of Norman's revolver in a grip that neutralized the trigger mechanism entirely, and with a single clean rotation, he removed the firearm from Norman's hand, with the brisk efficiency of someone retrieving something that had never had any business being there in the first place. He opened the cylinder, spilled the cartridges into his left palm, snapped the frame shut, and placed the cleared weapon on the hood of the nearest truck. "Your logistics director," Caldwell said quietly, "was detained at the Kamloops way station 40 minutes ago," as though the timing had been arranged. Because it had been. The sound of vehicles came off the highway. 3 dark RCMP suburban cruisers and 2 CBSA enforcement transport vans turned off the access road in a tight column, their combined light bars throwing red and blue across the flat October sky. They deployed across the far end of the lot with a practiced spread that established a full perimeter in under 90 seconds. Officers in body armor bearing RCMPC and CBSA field insignia moved in coordinated positions to cover all exits and approaches. Colton Tate was still on the gravel, cradling his forearm, his earlier posturing replaced by the hollowed-out expression of someone whose morning had contained a version of himself he would never be able to reclaim. 2 federal medics moved to him immediately, cutting back his jacket sleeve with trauma shears. A senior RCMP inspector walked directly past Norman Tate without acknowledgement and stopped in front of Caldwell. Her name was Yvonne Dupré. Tall, composed, with the economical movements of someone who runs field operations as a matter of routine rather than occasion. "Kamloops intercept confirmed it, Caldwell," she said. Her voice was dry and precise. "The conduit sections match the production batch codes tied to your intercept file. 42 kilos of ephedrine, exactly what Storm flagged. His alert log is being entered as primary corroborating evidence as of 20 minutes ago." "He hasn't missed a seizure in 6 years, Caldwell said. 7 next month, Dupré said. She looked down at Storm, who was sitting at Caldwell's left knee in a perfect heel, his dark eyes tracking the tactical deployment with a calm that looked almost administrative. "He's earned the rest." Norman Tate attempted one more appeal to the province, to his years in the industry, to unnamed political relationships, and Dupré handed him a printed copy of the federal warrant without turning her head fully in his direction. "Save it for Crown Counsel," she said. "You're going to need a very good one." What happened next was nearly lost in the organized movement of the deployment. The CBSA forensic unit moving to the flatbed, the investigators fanning through the lot, the sound of Colton being helped toward an ambulance. What happened next was Blake shearing. He had been standing slightly to Norman's left through the entire exchange, arms crossed, fixed blade back in his boot, doing a reasonable imitation of a man who was simply present and not involved. But Tegan, standing to the right of Caldwell, had been watching Blake's eyes rather than his hands for the past 4 minutes. She had watched them move from Norman to the federal vans, to the farm supplies side entrance, and back to Norman in a rhythm she recognized. A man measuring exits. Blake broke left along the far wall of the building. He grabbed a heavy steel bolt cutter from the open bed of a nearby ranch truck as he passed. A tool, not a weapon, but capable of serving as one in a man's hands when he was frightened enough. He moved faster than his build suggested, and he reached the building's side emergency exit at exactly the moment Kira Sandhu, the farm supply's 18-year-old counter-assistant, stepped outside to see what the noise was about. Blake Shearing grabbed Kira by the arm and backed her against the steel door frame. He raised the bolt cutter over her head in both hands, the knuckles white. "Nobody comes near me." His voice had reached a pitch with nothing measured left in it. "Every single one of you back off right now. I will. I swear I will." The federal deployment froze. Sidearms came up across the lot. Inspector Dupré's hand went to her radio. The geometry of a close contact hostage situation with a non-ballistic weapon and a panicking suspect required a pause that every operational officer in the lot understood was necessary and hated. Blake. Tegan's voice was out of her before she had made a conscious decision to speak. It was the voice she used in livestock emergencies, not loud, not soft, anchored to something below the panic line. "I know you didn't design this shipment. I know you drove that truck because Norman asked you to drive that truck, and you didn't ask what was in it, because that's not how it works when Norman Tate asks you to do something. Whatever you're thinking right now, this path ends one way. Look at how many federal officers are in this lot. Just look." "Shut up." Blake's grip on the bolt cutter tightened. He was sweating despite the cold, a thin, bright sweat across his forehead. "Everyone shut up. I want the keys to that Suburban, and I want. Everyone step back, I want." Kira stood rigid against the doorframe, both palms flat against the cold metal behind her, not making a sound, the controlled stillness of a person holding themselves together by concentration alone. Caldwell did not move toward Blake. He looked down once, very briefly, at Storm. The dog had already oriented to Shearing's position without a command. His body was pressed close to the building wall, using the shadow line of the structure. His legs folded beneath him in a crouch so low he was nearly flat to the gravel. Tegan caught Caldwell's eye. He gave her one fractional nod. She took 2 deliberate steps to the left, just enough to draw Blake's gaze by a degree. "Blake," she said, "look at me." Blake's head turned. "Storm Fass," one syllable barely above a breath. The dog moved along the wall at a level so low his belly nearly touched the gravel, covering the distance from the propane cage to Blake Shearing's rear flank without a single audible footfall. Then he was airborne, body twisting in mid-flight with an athleticism that looked impossible for an animal carrying an old ligament injury, clearing Kira entirely, and his jaws closed on Blake's right knee joint with the kind of surgical placement that only comes from hundreds of hours of precision scenario work. Blake's leg collapsed beneath him. The bolt cutter rang on the gravel and skidded clear. Kira stumbled forward, and Tegan was already there, catching the girl with both arms and pulling her behind the nearest vehicle in one continuous movement. Blake hit the ground hard. Storm held his bite, not shaking, not tearing, not escalating beyond what the situation required. A locked, controlled hold, applied with precision and maintained without alteration, until 3 federal officers arrived in a coordinated swarm, and Caldwell gave the hand signal that brought Storm back to heel in under 2 seconds. The silence that followed was the particular silence that arrives after high-tension events, not peaceful, but released. The kind of quiet where people become aware of how cold the air has gotten and how loud their own breathing is. Inspector Dupre walked back to Caldwell while her unit coordinated the loading of Norman, Colton, and Blake into separate transport vehicles. "Storm's alert log goes to the Crown Prosecutor's office tomorrow morning," she said. "His track record is primary evidence. 6 years clean." 7 next month, Caldwell said. Dupre held his gaze. "He's earned it." After the federal convoy pulled off the access road and disappeared toward the highway interchange, the lot was quiet enough that Tegan could hear the Nicola River in the distance, low and cold between its October cutbanks. She walked over to where Caldwell stood, Storm sitting squarely at his left side. She crouched down, offering the back of her hand the way she'd been taught, slowly, palm down, no direct eye contact. Storm sniffed her knuckles carefully, reading her. Then he pressed the full weight of his long muzzle into her open palm. "He's been compensating on that left rear all afternoon," she said quietly. "The gait pattern suggests an old soft tissue injury in the stifle, probably aggravated by cold. How long has he been carrying it?" Caldwell looked at her for a moment before answering. "Kandahar, 2017. He pulled a handler out of a burning vehicle before the secondary charge went off. Caught 3 pieces of shrapnel in the left hind quarters. The surgical unit cleared him for service, but the cold gets into it every year. "Bring him into my clinic on Monday," Tegan said. "I do soft tissue ultrasound on working dogs. We'll get a proper picture of what's happening in the joint." Storm exhaled against her palm, a long, slow breath, as though something he had been carrying for a very long time had been given permission to be set down. "His service contract concluded this morning," Caldwell said. "Today was the final operational assignment. He's officially retired as of 0800 hours. Tegan looked out across the benchland to where the fir trees stood dark and exact against the flat October sky. Then she looked back down at the dog, who had spent 6 years detecting shipments that federal agencies would have missed, who had been called a stray and nearly dragged into a flatbed, and who had in the same afternoon cracked a fentanyl precursor operation that would unwind across 3 provinces. What does retirement look like for a dog who's done what he's done? Caldwell was quiet a moment. He looked toward the river, then back down at Storm, who had closed his eyes slightly in the cool air, his chin still resting in Tegan's palm. Somewhere with land to run. Somewhere the leg isn't asked to do more than it should. a vet nearby who understands working dog physiology and won't underestimate what he's been through. He paused. I've been looking at a piece of land outside Logan Lake, 30 acres, Douglas fir and open grassland, river on the eastern boundary. Tegan did not look up from the dog. Logan Lake is 12 kilometers from my clinic. I know, Caldwell said. Storm's tail swept the gravel once, a single, slow, deliberate arc. It was the first time all afternoon he had moved it. In the years that followed, the Nicola Valley saw a quiet shift in the kind of stories people told at the Ridgeview counter and the Merritt diner. The RCMP's official summary of the Tate construction case described it as a coordinated multi-agency narcotics interdiction supported by certified K9 assets and a 6-month judicial intercept authorization. What the summary did not describe was a 29-year-old veterinarian standing in a gravel lot between 3 men and a working dog that the wrong people had mistaken for a stray. Storm got his ultrasound the following Monday. The diagnosis was a chronic partial tear in the caudal cruciate ligament, manageable with a modified exercise protocol, hydrotherapy, and a veterinarian who had spent enough time around working animals to know the difference between what a dog could handle and what a dog had already given. He learned that the grassland above Logan Lake was gentler on the joint than gravel, and that the November mornings, when the frost silvered the benchland and the river ran green between its cut banks and the fir trees stood sharp and still against a pale sky, were the best mornings to run long and slow and without any particular destination. He had earned every one of them 100 times over.